Hi, everyone. I am going to go live with Whitney Miller in just a minute to talk about recent events and give you some action steps for how you can talk to the kids and people in your life who might be struggling. I know that things have been a little bit rough lately, but you're not alone, and we are here for you. We're here with you. We've got a lot of people joining, so let's just give it a second. Hello, everyone. Hi. If you have any questions, please drop them in, and we'll get started in just a minute. I'm waiting for Whitney to join. Let me see where she is. Hello. How's everybody doing today? Whitney, where are you? If you're here, send a request to join. So many people. How's everybody? Like I said, we're going to be addressing recent events. Whitney has a very long professional history working with survivors of sexual abuse, specifically kids. And so we're going to kind of pick her brain tonight on some action steps. And then I'm coming in with the mental health perspective because y'all know that's my thing. So we're gonna tag team. We know that everybody is going through something very traumatic right now, and we're here to help. All right, I just saw Whitney join. Whitney, she's coming on in. Just waiting on Whitney. Drop your questions down below if you've got them. So many people tonight. Let us know where you're tuning in from.
Hey.
Hi.
Hi.
How's it going?
It's going well. All
Thanks
things
for
considered.
joining tonight.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So we've got a lot of people here who are really excited to, I think, just talk. Like there's been a lot going on this week, and I think everybody just needs a space to be able to process and to figure out how to have these conversations. I know we've got some kids that are watching right now. I recognize some of our junior ninjas. We've got some guardians. We've got some coaches. So
Nice.
lots of people. Yeah. So real quick before we get started, can you just let everybody know kind of who you are? Like, why did I bring you on? What's your background?
Sure. So my name is Whitney Miller, and I'm a stay-at-home mom of 3 little kids. But before I was a mom, I worked as a social worker in Louisville, Kentucky. I worked at a child advocacy center, which, for those who aren't familiar, child advocacy centers are places where all the parties who are investigating child sex abuse bring victims to be interviewed, to receive mental health evaluations, and be referred for counseling. They do medical exams. They usually have like a forensic pediatrician, or they can refer out to a forensic pediatrician. So it's a really cool way for all the community partners to come together and to work together to make sure kids are cared for in the best way possible and are cared for in ways that is in line with best practice. So I have a lot of experience. I was the intake coordinator, which means like all the reports that came in, I read them. I was kind of like the gatekeeper and decided if they were, cases we would see or not. And I would schedule, but then also acting as a family advocate, I would do crisis counseling with families while their kids were being interviewed by our forensic interviewers. And so I would meet with families. We would talk through all of the questions families usually had, which was like, how did I not see this coming? How could I have been so blind? What do I do next? And so I was even sharing with, I think, Alex, that this conversation just feels a lot like just a larger version of what I used to do, like a large kind of crisis counseling session.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And then for anybody who's new here, and thank you for letting me know about the feedback. I've got the headphones, so we should be good. Hopefully my phone stays on, but we're running low on battery here. But and yeah, so for anybody who's new here, thank you for tuning in. We are Neighborhood Ninjas. We work with kids in the ninja community. We help expand access for kids, and obviously we care a lot about the kids in our sport and everyone in our sport, right? We're always trying to help. I've got some background in working with survivors of trauma as well. And so I'm really excited to be able to have this conversation with you, and thank you for joining. Before we get started too, I do just want to kind of, good, I'm glad everybody likes the new audio. I appreciate all of you for letting me know. I do just want to acknowledge, that we're all kind of going through a collective trauma right now, right? And that something like this does take trauma in many forms for everyone involved in many different ways. So for those of you who don't know, I did work at Drew's gym did do, I don't know, right? But I was employed at Drew's gym. I know that he's been a mentor to many who, kids that I coach who knew him personally, kids who watched him for years and feel like they knew him personally, for athletes who began the sport because they saw him, on Ninja Warrior, for athletes who were trained by him. Just so many people in so many ways have been really hurt by this. And I think there's always that struggle of seeing something like this and thinking, what if this was my child? Or what if this was me? I know several people have spoken up about how they've experienced something similar when they were children, right? And how this is bringing up a lot of feelings and emotions, and we want to address that today. Yeah, somebody just commented below and said, their 3-year-old son is a huge fan and Drew is his hero, right? And I think so many people are experiencing that, where it's like you've had this hero potentially your whole life, and then you find out that they're not who they seem to be, or that they've done something, really, really wrong. So I guess what I want to say is there's no right way to feel right now, right? Like, we are going through a grieving process. There's going to be the anger, there's going to be the denial, and, just, it's okay. Whatever you're feeling right now, it's okay. Nobody's expecting you to feel any sort of way. And hopefully today we can kind of clear up some questions you might have of how do we even talk to our kids about this, right? Because we're kind of processing our own trauma, and then we feel like we have to protect everybody else around us at the same time. So just want to put that out there, and thank you for coming on. So I have some questions from people who couldn't make it here tonight. So the first one, the big one, I think why everyone's here, they want to know what advice you have for coaches and parents about having these conversations, coaches, guardians.
Oh, sorry, you froze for a moment. Yeah. So how to have these conversations, can you repeat the question really quick? Sorry,
Yeah,
I don't know if it was my phone or.
No, it's okay. So I think right now, we're struggling with, like I said, like the world's been turned upside down for some kids, right? And so there's this worry of how do we break the news to them, right? Should we be talking to them about consent or about sexual abuse? How do we let them know that other coaches aren't like this, right? So all these things that people are like, how do we talk to our kids about what happened? How do we let them know in a safe way?
Absolutely. So, first off, how do we start talking, consent with our kids? I would say that communication needs to start as early as possible. Like when you're potty training them, changing their diapers, giving them baths at an early age, you talk to them about, there are parts that a bathing suit covers, and these parts, there aren't games that go with these parts. Safe adults are not going to ask to, touch these parts. You should not see other adults' private parts. So you start having those conversations really early. Regarding the current situation, I think Ninja kids, there's a variety of age. And so my oldest kid is 7. And so I think he kind of represents the young age of young ninjas that are like heartbroken because there's teenagers that are coping, and the way you would talk to a 7-year-old is certainly different than a teenager. And so I think to start off, I'll just say, like, when I talk to my 7-year-old, I talk to them in an age appropriate way, meaning I didn't go into details about and then I took that opportunity to review body safety with him. I didn't necessarily connect the dots for him that it was because of body safety issues that, he was arrested. And you can be, your kid better than anyone else. If you feel like they need those dots connected, connect them. But I felt like for my own child, what was most helpful was just that they, we had that body safety talk that we've had many times before. And with teenagers, if you're coaching them, but especially if you are their parent or caregiver, talking to them, it's a time for just open, honest conversation, because it is such a hard, awkward thing to talk to them about. And just saying, look, honestly, I've been thinking a lot about this because of recent events, and I know you're heartbroken. But, we need to talk about keeping you safe. I love you. I want to support, I want to protect you. And I am sorry. Like, it's a time to even apologize to our kids and just say, look, I'm sorry. I've not talked to you and prepared you to walk confidently through situations like this. And I need to do a better job and I would love your help and helping me know how I can help you best. And so just sitting down and having those heart to hearts with your teenager, asking them like, do you have any questions? Do you know of friends that are struggling? Are you struggling? And just starting to try to open those lines of communication with them, because you are their support as their caregiver. And that's one of the things that I think Neighborhood Ninjas does a great job of, is providing kids who maybe don't have that strong support at home, providing them with safe adults that they could hopefully disclose things to, or, ask questions. And so, yeah, I think it's really important for parents to not just like lock down, like put up all the filters, all the blocks, all the guards on kids' phones. And so the kids' takeaway is, oh, now mom and dad are like crazy strict, and like this is not cool, and they don't trust me. They don't trust me to make good choices. It's important that they don't see us reacting just fearfully, but that they see us reacting in a way that's purposeful, that like we want to create a loving environment that protects them, but that also like equips them. And so, if your kids have Instagram accounts or whatever, it's having those conversations of like, okay, you can have this account, but it's going to be monitored. And like, if your kid is older, maybe even walking them through like how to respond to like a sketchy DM or a sketchy comment or whatever, and say, look, this is like an adult trying to manipulate you. This is a great example. This is an example. And so how about like, let me show you how you should respond to this, or let me show you how to ignore this, or whatever. And so, yeah, I think there's just a lot of wisdom needed. And I think that's why, even for parents, like the community aspect of the sport is important, because like, you can't just be on an island, like by yourself trying to like find wisdom to parent your kids. Like, you need a community of support for yourself as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's so important. And actually that's something that somebody asked too, was that people are processing in multiple roles, right? As coach, as an athlete, as a student, all in one. So how do you separate that and prioritize the grieving? That's kind of what I was mentioning before, where, some of us are really trying to prioritize the kids, and then we're not dealing with our own emotions here. So, having worked in the field, what have you seen? Kind of what suggestions do you have for us?
I'm sorry, what was the
do you have suggestions for us in terms of, if you're processing in multiple roles, like as a coach, as an athlete, as a student, right? And how do you prioritize that and, kind of sift through as you're grieving, but you're trying to help other people who are grieving?
Yeah. So something we always talked about with parents, like doing crisis counseling, one of the things like my boss who trained me to do crisis counseling would tell parents was that, like when you're on an airplane, and what do they tell you when the masks come down? You secure your mask, you get yourself in a good place to help before you try to assist anyone else. And so I think it's important as parents and caregivers and coaches to make sure, like, if we need to seek outside counseling, like, even counseling and like how to talk to our kids, like there's counseling services available that can help facilitate those conversations or kick them off. Or, if we're having trouble as a parent now handling like just anxiety, like, oh my gosh, like I've got to take my kid to this event and now I just don't know who I can trust. And so just even having that counseling third party, I think just making sure we're doing what we need to do to take care of ourselves and get ourselves in a position where we can parent, I think is probably first and foremost what needs to be done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. That's really, really important, right? So that whole thing about you can't pour from an empty cup is probably something that a lot of people have heard here, right? So I think, we're trying really hard to be strong for our kids, but at the same time need to make sure that we are also processing, and that'll help us be the best versions of ourselves that we can for them as well. I think this was a loss for many of us, as much, if not in different ways, as for the kids, for sure. So kind of on that note, so let's talk about consent, shall we? Right? Because we brought that up, and, different ages. So we've gotten some questions about how young is too young to talk about consent, right? What is consent? And I told you I wanted to talk about this one at some point. Like, what does consent look like outside of sex, right? Or sexual encounters? How can we practice consent in our daily lives? And then what's not consent, right? Because I think sometimes we kind of get stuck on like consent is yes, right? Which is the very like simple version, but forget that other forms of saying yes or what might be yes don't necessarily imply consent, right?
Right. So were you sorry, I thought you were gonna address that.
Oh, yeah, sure. So in terms of consent, right? So what is the age that you would recommend?
Oh, the age I would recommend talking consent, like not sexual consent, but talking consent as far as like body stuff. I mean, as soon as they're little, like when I change a diaper, like, hey, I'm getting ready. And it's not like they can give consent to have their diaper changed. Like that diaper needs to be changed. But you can tell them, hey, I'm going to change your diaper. Mommy's going to wipe your bottom. Like you can kind of have those languages of just telling them what you're about to do to them, which is more in line with what I think a doctor would call like informed consent. Like when you're at the doctor and they tell you, okay, I'm going to take a stethoscope, I'm going to touch your chest with it. You know, it's just letting them know how their body is about to be touched. And it builds in them this like, okay, safe people respect my body and respect the fact that like, I need to know what's about to happen to my body. So yeah, like with kids, you know, if I'm going to pick them up or if I'm going to, you know, direct them in some way, just like if I touch them, just if I can give them the opportunity to tell me no, I give them the opportunity to tell me no. Like, or with relatives, if they don't want to give a hug, or, you know, anyone, if they don't want to give a hug, if they don't want to give high fives, like I support them. Like, okay, they don't have to do that if they don't want to do that. And so I think just them learning that people who love them support the right that they have to use their bodies and how they want to use their bodies is the early, like, you know, not necessarily it's kind of like a foundation block. Like it's not sex, but it is sort of this foundation for a healthy sexual relationship later. Like people who love them will respect choices that they want to make with their body.
Yeah, definitely. I think I'd mentioned earlier too, it's almost that idea of, you know, when you're little and your parents expect you to hug everyone and you don't want to, right? Can anybody relate to that here? Right. And so it's kind of this really early idea of, well, somebody else wants me to do this and I don't feel comfortable, but I have to do it anyway. And so we do start teaching that so young, or even something as simple as, I don't know, you're at lunch and somebody wants your food, right? And they're like, can I have your sandwich? And you say no. And so then if the person's like, give me your sandwich or I'm going to do XYZ, right? And then you give it to them. Is that consent? Did you consent?
No.
Why not?
Coerced. You've been coerced into giving it to them.
Like, okay. Could you explain a little more?
Oh, sorry. Like, yeah, because they said they didn't want to give it to you, but you keep badgering them to give you the sandwich. And so, like, are they truly agreeing to give you the sandwich?
So would you say that works with sex or sexual encounters as well too? Like if somebody asks you to do something and you say no, but then they say, you know, they coerce you or they kind of threaten you or right, whatever it is that they do, and you end up saying yes, is that consent?
Absolutely not.
So kind of like the sandwich situation, right? You didn't really want to do it. You just felt like you had to.
Right.
Gotcha. What about other situations? What other situations might not be consent, right? Because I think sometimes we think about it as this has to be this like really violent thing, right? That happens, and we know that's not true.
Well, I think anytime you have dynamics of power, and so power can be anything from like an employee and a supervisor. Like there's a power dynamic there. There's power dynamics with age. There's power dynamics at play when someone has status. And so when there's someone with power, someone without power, there's definitely issues of consent that need to be addressed. So that's a lot of times why, like, you know, office relationships aren't allowed because, right, you know, they're like, how truly consensual can they be if someone perhaps is afraid they're going to get fired for expressing their true, you know, their true feelings about their own bodies. And so, yeah, and that's why like statutory rape laws are so important because kids can't give consent, especially with an adult. You know, and I was telling Alex earlier, so different states do have different consent laws. And so I think for gym owners and parents, knowing what your state's laws actually are is important. And there are child advocacy centers. It's a nationwide initiative. So there is a child advocacy center that serves whatever county you're in. And just contacting them, and they have to know those laws because they deal with court cases that deal with those laws. And so they're there to like provide information for the community. And so, you know, I would recommend reaching out to them and just saying, hey, like in light of all that's going on in the ninja community that my child is a part of, can you please educate me on what are the consent laws and, you know, what kind of resources are available for my family as I'm trying to like, you know, process this with my kid, because they're going to know like what is local to you. And I think that is important as you're trying to be empowered to like make positive change, is knowing like what is actually in your backyard that you can access.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, I'm seeing some comments in here that looks like the sandwich
Yeah.
metaphor was a little bit helpful. But so just to make it like really, really clear without metaphors here, right? So I want to make sure I've got this one right for the viewers at home, right? So consent, freely given, right?
Mhm.
You can take it back at any time. So just
Yep.
because you said yes at one point doesn't mean that it's yes at another point, right? That coercion does not equal consent, right?
Right.
So if there's power dynamics, threatening, what else am I trying
Substance,
to think of?
like substance. So
Substance, yep, if they're intoxicated,
right.
and if they're underage, right? So I have unfortunately seen some comments coming out asking about, you know, her responsibility or the victim one's responsibility, right? And in this situation, and you know that the investigation going on, or not the investigation but everything going on for so long, and what does that mean and what does that look like, and you know, is he actually not as at fault as we think? And so I'd love to know your thoughts on that.
Yes. So I think something that has to be pointed out is that child sex abuse investigations, especially high profile ones, take a long time because there is high profile ones, from my experience, take obviously they're going to take the longest because people want to make sure they have all their ducks in order before they make a move. So even after like a report is filed, a lot of times they do not want whoever the alleged perpetrator is to even know an investigation is happening until they've gathered enough evidence to, you know, subpoena evidence that they need, or to maybe even make an arrest based on interviews or any other evidence that they've been able to find. So the investigations do take a long time, and then even after an arrest is made, sometimes it takes a long time for them to actually go to court. So I don't think, I mean, it's, people are probably asking the question, but they're asking the question because it is a process that I don't think a lot of people are they're just not familiar with it. Hearing the process of his case, like, I mean, from, granted, I haven't worked in the field in a while, but like, it seems like it moved at a pretty good pace. Like, nothing too slow that I would have, like, I wouldn't have expected it to move any faster than it did. And it didn't surprise me when I was reading the report of how long it took, because I'm sure they were trying to do due diligence to make sure that they, number one, if they could get more evidence, like just to build the strongest case they could, especially since it was high profile.
Mm-hmm. Great. So I think the question is kind of more around we had a question kind of, so going back to consent, right, and understanding
Right.
the like the manipulation piece that was happening here,
Yeah.
and kind of just talking about how this case was not right, even though it was ongoing for so long,
Yes.
right? Not the investigation, but the case itself, how that still was not consent.
Gotcha. So it wasn't consent because consent law is like a child cannot give consent. And so at the end of the day, you may have a problem with what the law says, but the law is very cut and dry on what it does actually say. And so, you know, you may have an honest disagreement with someone about like who can and can't give consent. Like people, you know, may have strong opinions about that, but kids can't give consent. And I think it's demonstrable that there's a power dynamic with age, there's a power dynamic with celebrity, and just the manipulation when you look at people who prey on children. Like, the point of the relationship is to build trust and to manipulate them and to isolate them and to control them. And so there can't be consent when that, like, by the nature of the relationship is what's going on.
Yeah, definitely. And I want to actually talk about something you just said. So the manipulation piece, right? So I want to address this in two ways. So one is, I know that looking back at it, I've heard some comments from people saying, you know, oh man, like I wish I'd known, you know, or maybe could I have known? Was I in the right place at the wrong time, or right place, wrong time, right? Like, was I in a situation where I could have seen something and done something and I didn't? And I know that everyone's racking their brains right now. Like, anyone who spent any time with Drew recently, you know, has been thinking, was there something I could have done? Kind of, a lot of us are beating ourselves up about it, right? And I want to remind everybody that you only know what you know when you know it, right? So you can't go back and change anything that's happened, but what we can do is be educated and empowered to know warning signs moving forward. And I don't know if there were warning signs. I'm not going to say I spend that much time with him, honestly, but I'd love to know what are some warning signs that people, tangible warning signs we might see in the gym or in general. What should people look out for?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think something that I've definitely counseled parents who are asking the same thing is that, predators don't wear t-shirts that say, "Hi, I'm a child sex predator." Like, they don't. And so their goal is to be, as I tell my kids, some adults are tricky. I have little kids, and so that's like language that resonates. I'm like, some adults are tricky and they are going to try to trick you, to hurt you. And so, I think for them, that's appropriate language. But when we start thinking about, what kind of behaviors, we as adults can look for to recognize those tricky adults, would be just understanding that child sex abuse, like, we need to empower ourselves with things that are true and with facts. And so when you have 1 out of 10 kids who will be sexually abused by the time they're 18 years old, you start to see that it is something that is out there, that is real. It's a danger. You also see that stranger danger, which is something, you hear all the time. It's not true. 90% of kids who are sexually abused, they know their abuser. And then of that 90%, 60, the family says that of the alleged perp, that was a person my family trusted and knew well. So it's not this like stereotypical like person trying to lure a kid into an alleyway with candy.
Right.
Like, that's not what happens.
Right.
In real life, it is someone who has targeted a child because they see some sort of weakness that they're able to exploit and use to their advantage. They target them. They work to gain trust of not only the kid, but the family. They do that maybe by giving gifts, by giving special attention. They work to try to fill a need. So when they target kids, if they see a kid who, lacks self-confidence, if they see a kid who, doesn't have a lot of parental oversight at home or caregiver oversight, if they see someone who, is just kind of lonely, they will work to be the person to fill that need. And then they use that to isolate the kid. And I think that is the thing that really is what separates someone who is just trying to mentor and help a kid from someone who's doing something absolutely like sinister. It's the move where they isolate and they cut kids off from their families. They cut kids off from their friends, people who love and trust and support them. And so I think what we need to be on the lookout for, and one of the things that I think is really empowering, is that 81% of cases occur in a one-on-one scenario. And so that is a huge percentage of sex abuse cases that are occurring when kids are one-on-one with the perpetrator. And so, as coaches and parents, if we're armed with that truth, that this is when this most often occurs, we can work to make sure our gyms and any other like organizations our kids are involved in are following policies that discourage one-on-one situations or vastly like limit/monitor them. And then we can kind of know, even as kids, like if there's kids listening, like, if you're friends with someone and it seems like there's an adult or even an older, like a much older teen, like trying to like isolate them away from you or your friend group, or maybe isolating them away from their parents, like that is a huge red flag. And you need to check in with that kid. Maybe encourage the kid to check in, because that is a huge red flag when there's isolation that occurs. Because once a kid is isolated, and believes that this person is who best meets their needs, loves them the most, understands them the most, loves them, whatever, then they can sexualize the relationship and, take the relationship to a place that is criminal. And then after that, they maintain control, they threaten, they say like, you tell anyone, I'm going to kill your mom. Or they tell someone, if you tell someone like, our love will have to break up, and that'll be traumatizing because I'm the only one who loves you. Like, or
false promises, right? Of like, you have to stay. I'm the only one who's going to love you. We'll get married. We'll be together forever. Right. Yeah.
Or look what you're going to do to my life if you tell someone. Like,
right. Definitely. So that being said, right. So really important question that was raised earlier is, so if somebody is in this situation, right, and let's say that they really believe that this person loves them, they're going to change their life, or like maybe they're threatening them, right, whatever the situation is, how do we encourage them to come forward and share? Because right, maybe they are protecting this person because they do really think they love them, or they're afraid of the consequences and getting in trouble. So how do we encourage them to talk about it?
So encouraging kids, I think we need to be, so if I was their parent or caregiver, my advice to those people who are kind of that front line for that kid is to be as proactive as possible with noticing, people who are luring their kids away, who are trying to isolate them, and to cut that off, to put things in place, but to do it in a way like, you know what, I'm not trying to limit your fun. I'm not trying to be, just laying down rules out of fear. Like, I want to love you well. I want to protect you well. And I want to empower you to like have self-regulation and to have convictions about your self-worth. Like this is part of parenting. Like, it's not just this one-time birds and bees conversation. It's like this whole life of, preparing a kid for, navigating the real world and real things like this. And if there is a kid who, is struggling about coming forward, I mean, personally, what I would want to say to them is, come forward. Tell an adult that you can sit and you can list at least one safe adult. If it's a teacher, if it's a doctor, whoever it is, tell that person. And if they act busy or whatever, like, tell them as loud as you need to tell them. And then just realize, like, yeah, like, things might get messy, but things can't heal and you can't grow if you are being controlled and manipulated. And that healing and that growth will be so much more than holding that in.
Yeah,
definitely. I think just having those conversations, like, in front of kids, like, have the body safety conversations with young kids through teenagers. And like, if you haven't had the conversations, it's a great time to start, and even apologize for, like, I've not prepared you well for this. Like, I'm sorry. Let's start now.
Right, exactly. And I think with those conversations, it's also important to note that a lot of times our society puts so much focus on educating the women, right? Like, it's our responsibility to protect ourselves. And that when even something like this happens, right, where clearly, she could not consent, like all these things, there's still victim blaming going on, right? And so somebody did ask about educating our children, right? And how do we do that? And I think one is we need to share the responsibility equally with teaching our boys, right? Because they're going to grow up to be men who we all have a big responsibility in this world. And so it's not just on us. And so educating them to really, one, respect their own selves and bodies, right? But then two, to respect the people around them. And then I think for also recognizing that, we do have this like very gendered idea sometimes of how sexual violence occurs, and that's not true at all. Do you want to speak on that a little?
So how sexual violence occurs and how it doesn't?
Or like just the gendered thing, right? Where we were talking earlier about these perceptions of who gets violated, right? And
right, absolutely. So like, there's perceptions totally that, like, men are perpetrators and women are always safe, and that's not always true either. There's definitely perceptions. And I think that's why it's just important to like empower ourselves with the facts. It's people, most often it's people that the family knows and they trust,
right.
And someone who has worked to gain that trust. It's not, it's very rarely someone that hasn't made efforts to, have contact with the family.
Right.
Over amount of time. It's not a stranger. It's someone they know.
Right, definitely. Yeah. So it's important to also, as our kids are growing up, to make sure that they have really good self-worth, so that when somebody is coming to them and trying to offer them all these promises and the manipulation is happening, right, that they're able to hopefully, one, recognize it, right, because we're teaching them warning signs, but two, recognizing that their self-worth is not going to be wrapped up in whether or not they have the love and affection of this person, right? So that's really key. I'm seeing a lot of questions in here about whether or not kids should be alone at ninja gyms. I do believe most gyms do have the 2-person rule, right? In general, you should never be alone with a minor. So let me know in the chat down below if your gym does follow that process. But for most of us, I think it's 2 people in the gym at once. Based on what I've read in the report, right? Like, this is not somebody that was being coached at our gym. This is somebody from out of state. And I think that it's difficult because as coaches, we have to work really hard now, right? Extra hard to prove that, we are safe and we're trustworthy and we would never do anything to hurt any of our kids. But at the same time, we also want to make sure that parents feel safe, that kids feel safe, right? And we want to make sure that we have all these guidelines in place. So whether we're doing background checks, we're keeping 2 adults present at all times, making sure that also kids tell us if they feel uncomfortable. And I know we talked earlier about in Ninja, there's a lot of spotting, right? Which
Hmm.
involves a lot of
Touching.
touching. Yeah, and I know you had a couple thoughts on that. Could you share that with us?
Yeah, so I was just thinking like practically a way that maybe coaches and gym owners could help build confidence into kids. Like I think I talked earlier, like I think the response sometimes as someone who's not a parent in the situation is to just how can we model safe relationships? So if we know what unsafe relationships look like they're isolating, they're targeting, they're sexualizing, they're trying to show individual preference, like we
Hmm.
see what's unhealthy. So how can we be the opposite of that so that when a kid encounters something that's unhealthy, they know, okay, people who love and support me do not act like this toward me, and they know to start talking about it before it gets super serious.
Hmm.
And so in relation to like spotting, I think that's a really cool way that like we can empower kids by so for instance, my daughter, she's like teeny five, she's 5 years old, but she's like crazy strong. And if someone just asks her like, hey, can I spot you, rather than just,
Hmm.
she's 5 and it's really easy just to pick her up and like help her do
Yeah.
something, but asking her like, hey, can I put my hand on you on your back and help you swing across this, like, just telling you, hey, I'm gonna do this, can I do this, can you do this
Yeah.
on your own? I mean, obviously there's totally times when like a kid's falling and you've got to save them from wiping out, and there's not time for that question. But like by and large, I think even if a kid fell and is hurt and you need to help move them, you can say, oh my goodness, you've hurt your ankle, can I pick you up and
Hmm.
carry you off to the side, or would you prefer like I just help you stand up? Like you can kind of give kids choices and how they're touched, and you can let them feel like in charge of their bodies. And so I think the more people who are like, yeah, you know what, like I want to model helping kids feel in control of their bodies,
Hmm.
it gives kids confidence when it's like, okay, this person is not wanting to let me have control. They're keeping all the control. They're manipulating. Like, I don't know. It kind of builds in that this is how safe people act. This is how unsafe people
Yes.
act. And the more examples of safe people a kid has in their life, the better.
Hmm. No, I 100% agree. I mean, I told you earlier, like I work with kids who've experienced a lot of trauma, both physical and sexual and all the things,
Yeah.
right? And so when I coach, that is the first thing when I meet a new kid, I ask them, I'm like, are you okay if I do this? And I'll tell you, they really appreciate it. And I think sometimes we don't think about it because we don't
Yeah.
mean anything bad by it, right? And
Oh, no.
we're trying to save them, like we're trying to
Oh, yeah.
stop them from falling out of the sky, right? But they do actually appreciate it. And sometimes I can tell them they've never been asked that before. I think they're just so used
Yeah.
to people just like, here, let me fix your hair, let me touch your hair, let me hug you, let me do all these things. And it's like, what kind of message are we sending when we do that, right? That's like
Right.
other people can just come in and do that, and it doesn't really matter whether or not you feel comfortable. So
Right.
I think that's really, really important. Somebody asked in the chat. So this is asked a couple different ways. So I'm going to paraphrase it, but it's
Okay.
basically along the lines of, how do we explain the situation to our kids, slash phrased another way, right? How do we tell them that they can't worship their idol anymore? So I
Yeah.
know, like I said, this is heartbreaking for kids, right?
It is. Yeah. I mean, I experienced that definitely with my own 3 kids. They, like I competed at Worlds, but like my kids, like, what are you looking forward to? And their answer was meeting Drew. Like that was their big, like not seeing mommy do something cool. Like that was their answer. And
I was looking forward to that for you to do something cool.
well, yeah, like I wanted to do something cool too, but I kind of didn't. So anyway, yeah, so like, I mean, I definitely have been there and had that conversation today. And I think it was a good opportunity for me to also emphasize to them at a young age that just because you've had positive experiences with someone does not mean that it could not also equally be true that someone else has had not like had mostly like
Yeah.
negative or knows this person is a monster. Like it's just the nature that people who perpetrate, it's not that like every relationship in their life is
Yeah.
like that. And I think that's hard even for some adults to understand.
Yeah.
Like they're not a bad person. I've met them. They're so nice. Like, like the stereotypical, like what people say when they find out their neighbor is like a crazy serial. Like, I would have never thought they would do anything like that. They're so nice. Like, that's always the like naive response. And so, just pointing that out to my kids. I mean, like, look, like I am so thankful that you have like you had a positive experience with him. That's, that's good. But you know what, we need to be concerned about the negative experience. And, you know, he's not a good person. Like, you know, and having just like, I mean, my kids are really little. So like older kids, of course, it would be a different conversation. But, you know, just pointing that out that like, this is a time to kind of point out that, yeah, like some people have nothing but positive experiences with people who other people would call a monster. And, you know, it's a good time that they learn that, because, yeah, like, people are trying to trick you. Like, that's what I've told them. They're, you know, as long as I can remember having these conversations, it's like, you know, bad people, you don't know who they are. Mommy and daddy sometimes don't know who they are. There's people who want to hurt children and we don't know who they are. You know, they're going to try to look like good guys. And so, you know, my kids watch a lot of superheroes, so they hear like the good guy, bad guy analogy.
Right.
So yeah, like they look like good guys. They try to act like good guys. Like, that's why you need my help in helping you navigate, you know, like I just stress that, like, I'm here because I want to protect you. I want to help you navigate these relationships. And I think, like, you know, as they grow older, I mean, it's my prayer that like they come to me and I'm able to help them as teenagers, you know, continue to navigate wisely with relationships. So
Yeah, I think that's so key. There is that piece of, it's not because I don't trust you, right? And sometimes parents say that and it doesn't come across that way, right? And so it's like, well, no, you clearly don't trust me, right? And so I think setting that up from an early age is really important. But what about for the people who maybe didn't set that up from an early age and, you know, they've got teenagers right now thinking, wait, I'm 14, 15, right? I'm that age, or I interacted with this person, right? And thinking, what if that was me? What if that could be me? How do we talk to those people?
well, I think like if I was their parent or coach, it's like, praise God, that was not you. And, you know, you're thankful for that. And then at the same time, you sit down and it's like, you know what, we need to have a talk. And maybe I haven't done as good a job talking to you about this in the past, but, you know, from now on, like, I want to equip you well. I want you to have confidence going out into the world as an adult one day, being able to navigate relationships, having confidence in your convictions, confidence in your self-worth, confidence in the decisions that you choose to make, that you're a person who can stick by, you know, my no's mean no, my yeses mean yes, like that you're just confident. And so, yeah, just starting that conversation early with, you know, adults who will try to manipulate teenagers. Like, it's kind of like the more adult version of what I tell my own kids, like, and just sitting down and having that, you know, like, we haven't talked about this enough, but there are adults that their goal is to manipulate you, and you're going to think they love you. Like, that's what they're trying to do, is to make you believe they love you, to make you believe that you're extra special because of the attention they give you. And it's all a ruse. It's all a facade, because they're wanting to use you for what their own plans are. It's not about you at the end of the day. And so I think just educating kids on like what the intentions are, that it's not a love story. Like, this is not some love story. Like, I get that you would feel special. Like, someone with status is like paying attention to you. Like, I, as an adult, would say, I understand. Like, I understand that you want to know people, you want to be known by people. And someone who has that kind of prestige, like, yeah, I understand why that's alluring to you. And I think pointing out like you can understand their feelings is also like helpful, because then it's like, okay, well, they understand where I'm coming from, but then being able to help them course correct and understand like how they should be processing it. So yes, I understand that this is alluring to you and understand why it would be alluring to you, but here's why it should not be. And here's what I know as an adult, why this is inappropriate and why you need to run the other direction. And if you have friends, you need to watch out for them and you need to talk to me, and we'll work together and keep them safe. Like,
Yeah. And I was thinking too, just based on another comment I saw, right? So just thinking about that power dynamic, right? And somebody who has status. I think, you know, part of that too is it's teaching your kids like their own self-worth and that they don't need that, but that also that doesn't necessarily make somebody a good person, right? So I'm seeing so many comments about, and I've read statuses on this today, which is what brought it up for me, where it's like, this man was a hero for so many. And, you know, I looked up to him too, right? He was my boss, my coach, my mentor, right? I get that. But I think there are people who are watching him who don't actually know him. Like, what can you tell me about him besides the fact that he's a really good athlete, right? And like, what, I guess, you know, what I'm saying is like also teaching our kids to look for more than just, oh, they're famous, they're good at a sport, they have like money. Who is this person? Because when I think about it at the end of the day, like, I don't really know. And I think a lot of us don't really know, even if we, you know, I've been out to dinner with
Yeah.
him. I don't know. I don't know. I really don't, because I didn't know any of this, right? And most of us
Right.
didn't. And for those of us, for those of you who joined late, you know, I want to remind you all that like we only know what we know at the time, right? If you're shocked, if you feel like your world was turned upside down, me too. Most of us too, right? We're kind of all in this together, and that's it's okay. It's there's nothing wrong with your judgment for taking somebody at face value, because people like this are very good at being charming manipulators. You know, I was
Yep.
raised by them. I've been in relationships with them, like, and I know a lot of us have been coming out of saying like, you know, I that could have been me, that was me as a child, you know, like I'm very open about that. That was me as a child, right? And I'll say like people have asked, why did it take so long for this person to come forward, right? And we
Mm-hmm.
don't know, right? So one, I'm not going to speak for this person because we don't know anything, but I do want to remind you all that like whether or not this was something that was ongoing, it's still traumatic, right? Just like how this is affecting us all in different ways, it's trauma in different ways. And that takes time. It takes time for that to process. There's so many reasons why people don't come forward. I got a couple questions earlier about, well, why would they take so long to report? You know, sometimes it takes a while to process. You don't know what's going on. Maybe you're afraid. Somebody asked in the chat, you know, thoughts on how the mother responded. And it's like, sometimes nobody knows how to react in that situation, right? And
Absolutely.
that's why we're doing this. So I don't know what you want to add to that, but
Yeah, I mean, I think it does go back to the fact that we have to remember that people who prey on children, they're manipulative. So if a kid takes a while to come forward, they're being manipulated from the beginning into not coming forward. Like that's all part of the plan. Like it's not part of the plan that they immediately tell. You know, this is something that has been worked out. That's a relationship that's filling this need for the kid, and you know, they're maybe being promised things, or they're being told, you know, they have value because of this relationship. And at 15 years old, you're a kid, and like having someone like manipulate you in such a way that's like, this is what is defining you, and to some degree, like breaking out of that's hard. Like adults, which was not my practice, but I know adults getting out of abusive and harmful toxic relationships, it's hard for grown-ups. So like,
oh
how
yeah,
in the world are we gonna like
I'll vouch
hold a
for that.
15, like how are you gonna hold a 14, 15, 16-year-old to like that same standard
Yeah.
when we know, like, statistics for the most part, we know adults struggle to get out of those kinds of, you know, relationships, and adults struggle to come forward. And so I think with kids, like we can just show them like the grace we need to be showing kids, because they they don't have the power or resources an adult has. Like, you know, they don't necessarily, you know, have a car, a job, like all these things that adults have that should make them more free, but in reality it doesn't, because manipulators manipulate.
Yeah, definitely. And I
Yeah.
think, you know, that's going back to that education and teaching them like if it seems
Yeah.
too good to be true, it probably is, right? So, I do want to go back for a second. So I just got another comment in here based on what we were just saying, right? When you look at someone as a role model, especially for your child, hearing this, right, it turns everything upside down and it's so emotionally painful. And I do like I want to challenge everyone watching to think about what's your criteria for a role model, right? So if maybe you had a good interaction with him or with somebody else at some point, and that's why they became a role model for you, right? I'm not going to take away from that and say like that kids at our gym didn't have good interactions with him, because they definitely did, right? But I think there's also so many people who've maybe either never met him in person or anyone, right? Like let's generalize this. When you're looking at somebody as a role model, a lot of times, and that's part of what I love about Ninja Warrior, and it's part of why I wanted to get into it, right? Like we hear
Yep.
people's backstories, we see them crush the course, we see them do all these things, but again, like what do you know about them? Because I do think there are so many amazing ninjas in this community who stand up for what is right, who are amazing role models, who are mentoring kids, who, you know, we've seen like organizations pop up left and right to address social issues. You know, I'm gonna shout out Kara with Ninja Babes and Fighting for Women's Empowerment. And if anyone on here is not following her, go check her out, because I know she'll be doing a series as well to try to help bring some light to this. You know, we've got Ninja for a Cure, we've got Queer Ninjas, we've got Ninjas for Black Lives, right? So we've got so many ninjas who really care and want to see equality and are really embodying a lot of the traits in this community and outside of that, right? Like whether or not you're a part of this organization, any of our organization, there's so many ninjas who I think are amazing role models, but don't get like a lot of airtime, right? And so I think if your like criteria for a role model is like they're famous, they're good at sports, maybe it looks like they work hard. Like what is your criteria for a role model? And figure that out with your kid too. Like what is their criteria for a role model? And if they don't have it, come up with one together, because I think that will really help them with learning like who do I want to trust. I've seen some really good posts by some of the young adults in the community saying, you know, this has been hard for me. I thought he was a role model because I saw him on TV, but I honestly didn't actually know him that well. But you know, who's my role model? My coach who's always there for me, who always picks me back up. You know, that's my role model. So that is my challenge for everybody watching. I know this is hard for you. It's hard for all of us, but how are you defining it, and teach that to your kid too?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I totally agree with that. I know, like, for our family, so yeah, like, I mean, I love role models that are inspiring and are working toward change. My husband's actually a pastor. Like, we're Christians, we follow Jesus. And so we want to love justice, we want to love mercy, we want to walk humbly. And so yeah, like, I mean, in other athletes, like, that's what I've looked for. I've looked for people who love justice, who walk humbly, who love mercy, who are people who love others well, who work toward peace in their communities. Those are people that I would push my kids toward viewing as idols and viewing as role models, in the sense that, like, yeah, like, look at that person. They are working to make sure people are treated equally, and they are working to make sure not just to be a great athlete. I think there is something inspiring about people who can move their bodies and have this strength. Like, that is obviously inspiring.
For sure.
Definitely inspiring. Like, someone's character at the end of the day is like beyond inspiring. And regardless of their own personal convictions, we can see character, and we can see what they stand for, and, like, you know, how are they exhibiting kindness? How are they exhibiting love in their life?
Exactly, right? Because I think for me, so I don't have kids, just so y'all know, right? I work with kids who've experienced trauma, but I don't have kids. So, but for my kids that I work with, I've got 40 of them that I consider to be my kids. That's what I always say to them, is like, when you're coming up, so like a lot of them say I'm their role model, and I ask them why. I want to know specifically, like, what is it? What characteristics do I have? Because I think when we can teach them that, they learn what to look out for, and then what they want to embody in themselves. So part of helping them in general is helping them build up that confidence. I saw, I think a teen actually in this group said that teenagers are so self-conscious to begin with, right? Then when somebody's nice to them, they're like, wow, I feel like, you know, they didn't say this, I'm paraphrasing, but like, you know, you feel like so many people don't like you, you struggle with fitting in, maybe you don't feel good about yourself, right? And then somebody else is really nice to you, and it's like, oh my gosh, this person, it's like, it's my soulmate, right? I'm sure a lot of us have been there. And so the more we can talk to them about, like, who is it that you actually want to be, like, what do you value, and kind of getting them to really build up that self-worth, and let them know that their worth is independent of how anybody else sees their worth, and they don't need that external validation. I think that goes a really long way to helping build up, you know, our kids to be really strong in these scenarios.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Do you have anything else to add, or are there any last minute comments, questions that people need answered that I might have missed? I was kind of scrolling through all of the questions. If you got them, drop them in now so we can answer them. I know it's like way past everyone's bedtimes, so but yeah, I mean, you know, while they're doing that, I don't, there is no right answer, right? There is no one answer. I think just continue to keep the lines of communication open, continue to talk to each other, right?
Right. And I think talking to each other, keeping lines of communication open, like involving third parties when necessary, whether it's another trusted adult or a counselor. I think all that's super important. And I think just educating ourselves on what is a safe person. And I know, I think I said this to Kara earlier, but, like, you know, as ninjas, sometimes we think we're like superheroes, and it kind of feels fun. Like, we're flying, we're hanging on cliffhangers, like, we're doing all this fun stuff that kind of mimics, you know, superhero-y kind of things. And I think at the end of the day, I mean, it is kind of like circus tricks. It's cool, it's inspiring, but, like, this is actually, like, protecting kids. And there are things that we can do to actually, like, make our community safe for children. And that's such, like, as cool as it is to do these, like, you know, superhero-y things, it's cool to actually, you know, like, provide protection and create this safe environment where kids can thrive and adults can thrive and mentor kids in a safe way. Because I think that is something that is super unique to the sport. And so I would hate for, you know, coaches to lose heart and to feel like that, you know, they have to be on edge with mentoring kids now, or, you know, like, feel like people are judging them or whatever. Like, I think this is just a really great opportunity. People are listening, and they are wanting to make changes, and they're wanting to make the sport as safe as it can be. And so I think, you know, learning more about what red flags are, learning what consent means, and making sure our gyms and our events are taking all precautions to keep kids safe, and that gym owners and parents are just equipped with information, like who to call, who to talk to when, you know, if a kid did disclose, how to have conversations, like ongoing conversations with kids. And so I'm really thankful for, like, Neighborhood Ninjas to, you know, reach out to foster kids and just to be these really strong mentors for kids who would be maybe at risk otherwise.
Definitely. And I do actually want to add on top of that. So we will be posting some, I know some people are hopping off, so before y'all go, we will be posting some resources in the upcoming days on our profile. So we'll be linking to anonymous reporting hotlines. There are a ton of resources out there. So we will be doing our best to educate you so that if you have anything to report, or, you know, I think, so somebody asked, what can adults without kids in this scenario be doing? Like, what can the adults in the community do? And I think, like, step number one is just talking about it, right? Because so we've kind of fallen into this cancel culture trap. And this is actually, my post was on this today, because yesterday I was like, he doesn't define us, this doesn't define us, we're strong, right? Like, cancel, move on, right? Well, not move on, but yes, I agree. This does not define us at all. 100%. We're an amazing community. But what I don't want to see is this whole cancel culture where, you know, he's gone and then we learn nothing, right? Like, yes, cancel, but what can we learn? How do we have these conversations? You know, especially when I started working in sexual violence prevention, like a couple of years ago, I was calling people out left and right. Like, you hear people make jokes that are not okay. We've all heard it. And how often do we just laugh, right? And we don't necessarily say anything. And I've started asking people to explain it to me. So that's one thing that's been working really well, right? You explain it and they can't explain why it's funny. And they're like, oh, this is awkward, right? And then you have the conversation. So I think, like, checking each other, because sometimes we might do things that might make other people uncomfortable. Somebody commented in here too about adults too, right? Like, adults get these comments, kids get these comments. If we're saying this stuff to each other, I'd like to think we have a filter, but not always, right? So what messages could we be sending to our kids? What could the kids be watching? What could they be seeing? And then I think also just, like, making sure we're taking care of our own mental health right now, because regardless of how connected you were, it's traumatic in so many ways for so many people, and it's a lot to bear.
And I think, like, coaches and gym owners, like, need to step up and just say, like, how can I just be a safe person? Like, how can I model, even if it's awkward and goes out of the way to some degree, like, how can I best model, like, a safe relationship for these kids? Because at the end of the day, I want them to be able to recognize an unsafe one. So I was saying, like, just like a practical tip, like, if I was having to text or email a student, I would always include the parent or guardian, like, on that text or email. Like there's no reason for me to be, like, having one-on-one texts with a kid. And so just having that kid's guardian on the text, or having that kid's guardian, like, you know, on the email as well, unless there's a reason that's, like, major, where, you know, like, the guardian is the alleged perp or something. Like, there's no reason to not include them. Or, you know, and when we mentor, like, get creative, like, maybe grab 2 kids at a time, so it's not you and just one child, it's, you know, you and more than one, and just going out of our ways to be like, and maybe even to put words on it, like, hey, I need you to grab so-and-so because I want to make sure, you know, we're not in a one-on-one situation, and, like, putting words to it rather than just doing it. Because I think when we put words to things, then kids are like, oh, this is why they're doing it. Because sometimes kids don't connect those dots.
No, like, oh, I shouldn't be alone with an adult. I agree. I do that too. And it was weird. I'll tell you guys, it was weird when I first started doing it, right? It's going to feel uncomfortable for you. And you're going to be right? Because in your head, you're like, I would never do something like this. Why do I need this, right? But you do get used to it. And I think the more that we can normalize it for ourselves, we're also normalizing it for the kids. We have literally 60 seconds remaining before this shuts off. So I'm going to save this. It will be posted as an IGTV. If anyone you know missed this, please tag them. If we missed any of your questions, Please comment. I hope this was helpful. I will be posting resources in the upcoming days. So thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. This was really, really helpful for a lot of people, and we will be continuing the conversation. We're not done, right? So this is just the beginning. All right. Thanks. Have a great night, everyone. Bye.